I think because a lot of people forgot this was a people business. There's a lot of people that are thinking that real estate is going to be a technology-driven business. You will never take the human experience out of selling real estate. Many have tried it. They've tried it in the mortgage world. They've tried it in the real estate world. So there's a lot of people that think, let's put a business person in and run it like a business without caring about the personal experience that they go through. I mean, how many times have we heard that real estate's all going to be driven online? Nobody will ever deal with a realtor ever again. That's been going for the last decade, and it's never, ever come to fruition.
Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Well, folks, welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. I think that one of the things I'm excited about is that, Aaron Hodson, who is our guest on today, Aaron has known me from back in the days where I was actually still in an office in Brisbane, Queensland, all the way to Aaron was one of the key reasons that Calista and I moved to the US. But mate, it's wonderful to have you on the podcast, wonderful to connect and wonderful to put you in front of the Rethink Real Estate family.
Well, thanks for having me, bud. I mean, I thought I would have been one of the first, given how long I've known you, but, so there's nothing wrong with being later down the list.
Straight into it, boxing gloves up. Speaking of which, mate, you used to throw them around a little bit. You've got a bit of a background in boxing.
Well, I won't say my background it kind of was, but I mean, I always wanted to be a rugby player, and I was never, quite honestly, good enough to be a really good rugby player, but I was pretty handy in the, with the training that we were doing with boxing and training for rugby. So my plan was to go, off to a great rugby school as a rugby player, but it never panned out. I managed to get in on the boxing side of it, but it also taught me that my future careers were not going to be in the professional sporting arena. It wasn't pretty good either, but taught you how to get smacked on the chin a few times, which was probably the best lesson for business you can ever have. So,
well, I think that, and that's really what I want to bring to this podcast today, mate, and the people that are listening is that you've got a pretty decorated story within the real estate world. You've got a pretty big story from the diversity of business that you're doing now as well. I think that the one thing that I can appreciate is that you've taken your skill set within real estate and you've actually been able to draw parallels in other industries and certainly do that. And I want to dive into that, but I want to get into the nuts and bolts to build the same level of credibility that I've got for you to the audience. Is that, mate, you started in Western Australia. Now, I don't want to say anything bad along the lines of Western Australia because you are a Kiwi in at true heart from the very beginning, mate. But your real estate
correct, I was.
Yeah, your real estate career started in WA, right?
Certainly did. Yeah. I mean, my career in real estate was quite interesting because I mean, you might even not even know this, but I was actually I moved to Western Australia when I was probably 18. I was actually a coded welder by trade, and I worked for Caterpillar, and I actually worked for a great company over there called Westrac, who was the main Caterpillar sort of supplier. And I had this really random job where I was a coded welder. Then they used to fly me into these mine sites when it was too hot for anybody else to work. And I just got absolutely sick to death of it. And funny enough, as all good stories start, I bought a rental property, and my mortgage guy said, you know what, you should get into real estate. It looks like a fun deal. So that was my entry into real estate because I was so over the job that I was doing. I was making a lot of money, but not the most fun job I've ever had in my life. And that was kind of my foray into real estate. It just seemed like a lot nicer job to wear a suit and a tie and drive around a nice car all day than sit in a 45-degree heat welding up mining machinery. So it was just a nice transition, and I did that when I was 21.
Well, it's funny that you say that because, I had David Morse on the podcast who you introduced me into, and David mentioned that he was in Maine, right, was where he was, and it was easy to get people to convert over to the real estate industry because they were either outside freezing to death or they were inside in the air conditioning, warm and actually making cold calls and talking to people. So that was really like, if anybody knows the mining community within Western Australia, it is a tough gig.
Oh, yeah. But when I started in that, I was working 6 weeks on and 1 week off, and that was my work roster. And there was no days off. You just flip shifts. So the motivation to get out of it was pretty high then. It was pretty high.
So Roy Weston was the company that you started with, or was there a company before that?
No, it was Roy Weston. They were they weren't sort of like a national franchise, and Roy Weston was an old stalwart in the West Australian real estate industry, and it was really just a license. There wasn't kind of like the same franchise set up, and then Harcourts came in and purchased that group, And that's sort of how I ended up getting affiliated with Harcourts back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah. So breaking that down, mate, you were an agent for how long? And then you were a business owner as well.
Yep. So I was an agent for probably just over a decade, and then got super smart and bought the real estate group that I worked for. So I ended up buying the office to discover that you don't make anywhere near as much money being the owner as what you do being the agent. So the goal was to grow a big group, and we ended up having 6 offices. And I think for quite some time there, we were the number 1 office in the country for Harcourts, and then sort of sold out and went on to some other things with the corporate side of things. So yeah,
let's talk about that transition, mate. So obviously you've gone into the sales side of it, you've then gone into business ownership, the natural progression. But and with all due respect, is that you had no exposure to the corporate real estate world prior to them purchasing, what was Roy Weston and what ended up being Harcourts West and is still Harcourts Western Australia. You were the sort of stepping stone that they had onto the west coast of Australia, and I guess that then you got involved into Harcourts International, and your primary role was actually international expansion at that point. How did that come to be, mate? Like, that's a guy from New Zealand who was a welder, that then was a real estate agent, that then was a business owner, into then international expansion for one of the largest real estate companies in the world. Probably not at that time before you were doing it, but still.
It's interesting because, we always like to say that these great sort of turning points in our life come from a lot of great planning. It's a goal that we set ourselves earlier in the day. And quite honestly, this is where I can claim that I'm an Australian, because this is a very Australian thing to say. It's like, the leaders of Harcourts really well. And I remember for probably 2 or 3 years, Mike Green and I, whenever we'd go to a conference, you'd always have a couple of beers and go, when you're over this, we should look at taking this thing global. It's always about 4 or 5 beers into it when you start having that conversation. So it seemed like it was a great idea at the time. And when I made the decision to sell out, I had no intention of, I was going to go do something completely different with my life. And I think I reached out to Mike just to sort of thank him for what we'd done. And he sort of posed the idea: would you be interested in making a move over here to Queensland and look at maybe doing some international expansion? And it's like a bull to a red flag with me, an opportunity like that. So I think 2 weeks later I packed up everything and moved to Brisbane and sort of took over the international side of things for Harcourts. And quite honestly, no idea what I was doing. I'd built a great real estate business, but the whole international expansion thing was a completely foreign territory for me. But people are pretty much similar all over the world. You just got to have a good value prop to sell.
Yeah, I think that that speaks to the nature of what real estate is that it is I think that it gets to a point where there's so many different attributes of it every day. You sprinkle on top of that the corporate element of real estate and then the international side of things. What were the countries that you were responsible for bringing on? Because there's 11 countries now. I think that there was South Africa, China. There was so many of them that you were responsible
China,
for bringing the
South
deals.
Africa. We had a lot that didn't go anywhere, Ben. We had I spent a little bit of time in India with Paul Wright, and there seemed like an incredible opportunity there to realize that it was just something we didn't want to touch. So it's like any good growth expansion. You've got to do a lot of research before to determine whether it's going to be something that's going to work. But the ones that we had a big influence, obviously, Indonesia was a big part of it. That was already there, but there was a lot of cleanup involved in that. Obviously, the US, China, South Africa. Who else did we have going along at that time? I think we had a few other random places in Zambia and places like that, which I don't think exist anymore. Yeah. But honestly, at that point, it was just really digging up opportunities. And creating relationships in other countries was always giving us opportunities elsewhere as well. So even some of the ones that have come on now, those conversations had been going for 2 or 3 years before anybody sort of made the commitment. But obviously, when I got to the US, I fell in love with the place. So the sort of drive to do any more international expansion kind of disappeared because I could see a bigger opportunity here, and I loved the place, loved the opportunities, sort of loved the flexibility of business. I did find in a lot of the other countries it was a little bit restrictive on the things that you could do. And I think this model, the Harcourts model, was very flexible to make it work for people. And unfortunately, in some countries that was a little challenging.
So let's talk about the transition of then going from the international expansion and having the whole world at your feet, so to speak, and then coming over to North America and seeing the opportunity here. There's no doubt, because you and I have both done the same thing, is that you exposed me to the North American opportunity as well. And then it's honestly like drinking from a fire hose. The premise of getting 1% of the marketplace can be bigger than anything else internationally. I would say it's the number one established real estate market in the world, by country mile from a volume perspective, but then a price point, but then the dollar perspective. There's all these positives, but I guess that the challenge that you had in front of you, though, is starting from scratch in one of the biggest markets in the world, regardless of value proposition, mate. You moved here, and basically Mike said to you, "Hey, good luck," and you grew the network to I think you got it to like 30 odd offices, Southern California based, and a little bit of Northwest stuff and everything like that before you handed over the reins. But I guess that. What was going through your mind as you did it? Was it excitement, or was it daunting, or like take us through the journey?
Complete and utter fear. It was like, hey, we can all be brave and say, actually, what I'd probably be better off sharing is what I did wrong. And I think the not understanding the size of the market. I mean, you can see numbers on paper and it looks pretty impressive, but sort of coming from the markets where we worked in New Zealand, Australia, and smaller population markets, you're a lot more careful about what you do because you don't get a lot of opportunities. And I think the mistake that I made was I was very, very focused on where we were trying to go and not on where we were at that exact moment. Because it was almost like there's just so many opportunities. It's kind of like, bull in a china shop. Where can we go? What can we do? And I feel like that was part of it. But I think understanding what the opportunity was something that I wish I knew a little bit more about before we dived into it.
So give me an example. Give me an example of that. What do you mean by that?
Well, just how quickly things can escalate if you get it right. How quickly you can get to the end result if you actually get the starting point right. And I do think that's a fundamental business mistake of a lot of people as well, is we're always looking for that $1 million idea where there's a lot of $100 ideas that'll make you a millionaire. And I think we were looking for the big win, the big group or things like that, where the reality of what we do is we take care of people. It's a community and it's that type of thing. And I think if we were looking more at finding the right people, individuals, and going down that right direction, it might have been a little different, because I think looking for those big wins, it puts a lot of emotional sort of business pressure. There's obviously a lot more cost involved in things like that. So, there wasn't a lot of days where I felt really comfortable about what we were doing, but it was that nervousness of, the opportunity, which was very, very motivating, because you knew there was no end to the size of the opportunity. Whereas a lot of markets, you're kind of capped under how far you can go. Like the markets in South Africa, there's not really a big chance of getting more than 300 or 400 offices, because that's a huge market. But you have 300 or 400 offices here, and you're still a small player in the industry.
So, do you think that the size of the opportunity and the expectations from those that, from a leadership perspective, put a certain type of pressure on you that sort of made you force some decisions that maybe you wouldn't have done if you were given some more time and leeway?
Probably not. I mean, I had one of the great things. The pressure wasn't there. I think I put more pressure on myself than I did on anybody else.
Right.
It's like, because you and I are very similar like that. There's enough's never enough. Like, there's always how much further can we go, or how big can we get. There's a lot of ego behind that. We always want to do things that nobody else has done, and I honestly think that the biggest motivator for me was I was constantly told that you can't do it. No non-US company's ever gone there and succeeded, and so that was kind of like the motivation. No, I don't think so. I think I put more pressure on myself than anybody else did, to be honest with you, bud. So
yeah. Well, and mate, it's funny going back through and reflecting on this. You and I have done it a couple of beers deep before, and now doing it somewhat sober. I'm assuming. Okay, it is only. Yeah, it's time. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, wait till 5 o'clock. It'll be a very different conversation.
but I guess that mate, the expansion then that you had in the real estate side of things, and then the cadence that you put on this business was pretty good. But where did it get to a point where you're like, okay, because I remember you sitting down with Calista and I one day, we'd moved over here with the auction, side of things and everything like that. You definitely had felt a responsibility to Calista and I, but then you're like, hey, look, I need to go do something else. What was that turning point at that point?
That's a good question, but boy, this is like Dr. Phil. I feel like there's something going on here.
Getting deep.
You think about it a lot, but honestly, but I felt like I hadn't done enough for myself.
Okay.
I'm turning 50 this year, and obviously wasn't back then, but I kind of felt like I hadn't done enough for myself. I had not, and because I'd sort of become known for getting into the startup, getting things set up, and as an entrepreneurial person, you're kind of cutting yourself out every time you got something started and moved on.
Yeah.
And so I sort of kind of felt like I wasn't doing enough for myself, and I had certain areas of what I sort of thought I was very good at that I kind of wanted to sort of try for myself. And it's definitely not a decision you make lightly. And hey, we've all made mistakes, and we've all gone down some paths, and I just felt like it was time for me to give myself a good shot at doing something on my own. But I
Uh,
was
The,
also
the,
been in Harcourts for nearly 16 years at that point. So
yeah, fair.
it wasn't a new gig. I'd been there a long time from a business owner, living in Brisbane and running the international side of things, then going to all these different countries, spending a lot of time in China, India, South Africa, and then coming to the US. And I just sort of felt an opportunity, there was a little bit more I could do here.
It's funny how you feel like you get stuck behind an opportunity. Like I certainly get that, with the auction opportunity that we have you here is that you kind of get stuck within the cadence of your own business and you think that, segueing out of it can build something. You think you can offer so much more if given another opportunity or exposed to another network or another group or whatever it is. So I can totally see that. But then, mate, you sort of stepped out of it and ultimately you then sort of hit the ground, for lack of better terminology, just running. The rubber hit the road immediately from a coaching perspective, not only for high performance real estate people, but then also your speaking career. Like, mate, I remember speaking to you that you were on a plane every day for like a month at one point, post you being there. So, and like going East Coast, going Arizona, going different countries, even back to New Zealand and Australia to speak, things along those lines. I guess that what was it like not giving yourself really a break? You didn't have one.
Oh, I did. The first 30 days, there was a lot of what the hell's happened? Oh, shit, what have I done? There was a lot of that for the first month. But, I think just for me, it was really understand that my sort of life and things that I've always done has been built around the relationships that I've created with people. So I had some people around me that gave me some opportunities to try it, to see if it was something that I liked. And, I did a couple of great events and then sort of got picked up and it snowballed from there. But funny enough, entering into the coaching world wasn't actually something I had any intention of doing. I mean, Sure, some of the consultancy work, but coaching's coaching. We know that. Everybody's got an opinion on how they do things. So, predominantly the thing that I wanted to do was share a way of doing things better in business without it being, the next bright and shiny object. You and I both know this for a fact. The foundation protects everything of where you go. And flash in the pan success is quite common, but it was more about teaching people the grind of what it takes to stay at the top, what it takes to build a business that works out that way. So a big part of what I ended up doing was helping a lot of companies restructure the business through changes in the market, because this was back in, when things started to get a little bit funky. So it was just helping people sort of restructure. I'll tell you the first thing I did learn though, Ben, was I'm a lot smarter looking at somebody else's business from the outside than I am looking at my own from the inside.
Wow. Okay.
So and I think that's probably one of the things that I'm the most grateful for my career is, I made a ton of mistakes, but it was the most valuable education that I could have ever had, because how you fix those things and how you recover and how you keep your business going, it kind of gave me some assets, because having been through those trenches and done that, launch companies in different countries and, fix things that weren't going well, it just gave you a bit of a different view on how things should be run in business.
Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but wanted to ask a quick favor. If you're seeing any value in what we're providing, we'd love it if you could like, follow, or subscribe, whether you're listening on a podcast or watching us on YouTube. One step further is that if you can think of anybody in your community that this episode could help, we'd love it if you could share it to them so we could cast our message further and broaden our audience. Thanks again. Do you think that your third-party view of looking into others and being very successful at dissecting what's wrong and what's right and everything like that, is it because of there's a less, we speak about this in the real estate deal, there's less attachment to the outcome?
100% yes. I'm not emotionally connected to it. I mean, hey, my key to success in anything when I'm talking to anybody is the day you can remove the emotional component of your business, you start thinking logically, you start thinking more process driven about what it is, the result's always going to be different. I mean, you and I both know this. A lot of people have failed miserably because they've been emotionally connected to something. Not knowing when to walk away, not knowing when to make a decision because they're so emotionally invested in what they're trying to do. It makes them think a little irrationally about what the result is. I mean, how many times have you spoken to a realtor that says, I'm not stopping this because I've spent so much money on it, it's been going for so long, I need to see it through. Although it's proved to them 10 times over that it's a massive failure.
I think regardless of real estate, I think there's so many things that you can see from a third-party perspective of going, wow, okay, there's an emotional attachment there. They should let that go. Yeah.
Well, I always talk about it. It's like you've got to get the emotions out of it because you're going to make a decision based on like an emotional reaction to it. Like, who am I going to hurt? What's going to happen? And when there's an emotional connection to it, your speed of getting out of it's never there. Like, you want to hang on as much as you can.
Yep.
Whereas when you look at things a little bit more economically, like if I keep doing this, it's going to put me further and further into a hole. So that gives me the ability to look at something from a non-emotional standpoint. You can be a lot more honest and truthful with people about what their budgets look like, what their cuts need to look like. And, it makes because my income's not dependent on it. And obviously when you take that out of it, a lot of things change pretty quickly. So
I guess that the to keep on track with your story, mate, and then I really want to get you some of your opinions on some of the localized market-driven stuff being in, the mortgage industry and the agent industry of real estate. But I guess that, you then found yourself pretty quickly not only doing stuff in real estate, but you found yourself pretty quickly in the mortgage side of the business as well.
Yeah. And I mean, real estate and mortgage is probably about 60% of what what I'm doing now. And the business consulting side of things, we've got clients in the hospitality industry and the medical side of things. And that's just really because the big focus for me is people dealing with people. It doesn't matter whether you're selling a car or selling somebody a face cream, it's the client interaction becomes the biggest part of it. And so I think for me, once I found the thing that I was really passionate about, that I knew I had a real point of difference on, staying focused on that was a big change for me. So, so whether it's real estate or anywhere else, I think real estate's more prominent with the relationship because on paper, we're all exactly the same. I mean, no realtor's really different. And so we try to focus on things like that, where the reality of it is the only asset we've got is who we are as people. So it was sort of really focusing on that a little bit more than, here's the new lead gen system that's going to change your business, which we all know we're full of shit when we say that. It's not,
no, it's right. It's like I often say that, it's you see the audience typically, clam up a little bit when you're like, okay, guys, so when it comes down to the marketing conversation, really what you should be saying to the sellers is that, hey, we're going to put it in the MLS and it's going to syndicate. And that's basically all I'm going to do because that's the only thing that anyone can do, in order to get the property exposed. Essentially, I'm just here based on whether or not you like me or you don't.
You're right. And hey, we all know a lot of people that have been very, very successful just because they're nice people. They might not be terribly skilled at what they do, but you get over that if you trust and respect somebody.
Yeah, no doubt, mate. No doubt, indeed.
We try to sell the skill and the experience, but nobody gives a crap about that. I mean, they want to know if you're going to take care of me. Do I like you? Do I trust you? Can I have an honest conversation with you?
So then you took another path, mate, where you. I don't know whether or not you because I didn't see you calm down in any way, shape, or form from a travel perspective, but you then put yourself on paper, and I don't mean that physically. I don't mean that like most people then write a book or anything along those lines. You actually then took the structure of what you have seen within the real estate industry and mortgage industries, and you created SellWell.com. Which is a self-paced learning platform and a marketing platform and a resource platform for the industries that you operate in. Mate, how difficult, like from speaking from one person to another, that like I've tried to do the same with the auction business, with the accreditation programs and all of that type of stuff. It's probably one of the most difficult things that I've ever found. And that's maybe because of my lack of academic, accolades, I guess. But did you find that difficult?
You're lucky you're free. You're like
me. So how did you find that process? What made you do it, and how did you find that process?
Well, funny enough, it wasn't something we planned on doing, and it just happened one day where doing all these events and talking to a lot of realtors, and it was sort of like a light bulb went off one day, and I thought, man, our industry is really screwed up because the day that you get into it. Historically, these are what your two choices are. Go and get every last dollar you've got and invest it in lead gen, which we know is going to make you fail. Or you go and spend $1,000, $1,500 a month and get someone to teach you how to do it that's never done what you're trying to do. Those are your two options. And so my thought process was, we need to fix this because the starting point in this industry sucks.
Yep.
The starting point in this industry is forcing people into financial hardship, and it's not giving people the leverage they need to grow. And so the whole philosophy around bringing SellWell was giving people a foundation to run a very, very good business. There's nothing in there to buy. There's no lead gen opportunities. It shows people the exact structure of what they need to do to build a consistent, ongoing business that constantly keeps building. It's how to take care of people. It's not how to focus on the next deal. It's how to, when somebody gets into your business, how do we leverage those into more opportunities? A wonderful thing that I learned from being part of the Harcourts group, it was about the experience. And I think for me, that was solving a problem. It was like I saw too many realtors, a year into their business, struggling to pay their mortgages. And that's our fault because the advice that they'd been given up until that point was designed to send them broke.
Yeah. Yeah, it was designed just to tell them something in an individual moment, so then they'd leave them alone. I just the throw the shit against the wall to see what sticks of this industry from a leadership capacity, I think, is a bit of an epidemic within the culture of the industry. There's no question. But then, and as we dive into now, mate, some opinions of the industry, because I think that. They might hear a New Zealand Australian. I'm going to give you that New Zealand Australian hybrid. Okay,
depending on what we're talking about. So,
yeah. And then an Aussie talking about this, and from a North America perspective, they're like, oh, of course you've got that opinion, but mate, what is? I know that this is a vague question. It's a shit question to ask a mate, but what is your opinion of real estate in the States?
Yeah, wow. You got to be careful who you offend of this. I mean, I think here's what I think about the real estate industry of this. I mean, if I ever created a very average tech product to sell, I'd want to be selling it to the real estate industry. And because the industry for me is designed to keep people on the verge of, let's put it this way, they class a huge producer, however you want to put that term. I don't know, a lot of them do it. Someone that probably does 15 to 20 deals a year, which ironically is kind of medium income for the country. You're not somebody that's making $1 million a year. You're probably so it's become very custom to awarding or recognizing mediocrity.
Yeah, okay.
And I think it hasn't transitioned into being a real career. I do think that's one of the strengths of the Australian and New Zealand markets, that being a realtor is a career. It's a full-time gig. You have to run a business to support a business, and the average income of the realtors over there is way higher because that's just the nature of the business. I think the US market's really struggled to transition out of it being a part-time thing. It still has that thought process. It's the retired housewife's gig to go and do. And it's just sort of struggled to get out of that. But, having the split from the buyers, listing agents, like that, it's quite a dysfunctional sort of an industry.
Yeah.
But it's also designed to be a place that sort of keeps people going, throwing in these little products that people buy where reality of it, very few of them are actually going to help them change their business. So my sort of opinion on what the market's like is the day we can transition it from a hobby into a career, things will change dramatically. I think this market's definitely going to help. I think the last stats that I saw, we've lost nearly 800,000 realtors this year, which is not as impressive as it sounds because it went up nearly 1.5 million through 2020 and 2021. But yeah, it's a hell of a job if you put the energy into it. Actually, let me sum it up a little bit different. I think the day that realtors treat this like a job, not a hobby, is the day that things will change. And I think that's the biggest thing that I work on with people is this is not a job where you can show up at 11 o'clock and hope to get lucky. I ran my business 8:30 to 6 o'clock every day as a business and everything you do outside of it. And I think I can probably testament to you in this. And this is something that I'd always say about you is if you wanted a job like Ben, you've got to try and work as many hours as Ben does. Most people fall off. Because if people actually knew the hours that we put into growing our businesses, they wouldn't even touch it. They'd never do it.
No, they never see the behind the scenes. They see what's just in front of them. But I guess that do you think there's an opportunity for that change, mate? And why I say that to you is that, we've just gone through, I believe, one of the toughest marketplaces to be a business owner in I think for the last 3 years. Everyone says the market's great and all that type of stuff. And yes, there was a lot of money made. But the one thing that happened in the industry is the cannibalization of the commission structure. We come from a world where 50-50. Brokerage gets 50%, the agent gets 50% is normal. Now, don't get me wrong, it's probably much, much higher now since things have changed. But we're here where there's companies out there that you pay them $7,000 and that's your cap for the year. Or you pay them $100 a transaction. Or you don't pay them anything and you just give them your title and escrow business or whatever it is. It just cannibalizes the industry from a value perspective and nobody is loyal to anything anymore or any brand or anything. That's where I lose a little bit of faith in things based on what has happened to it. What's your opinion of where it's gone, mate, from the cannibalization of that?
For me, it's come to a quick cash out and let's get in, get out, let's make our money. You and I could probably list 4 or 5 companies that we've seen in the last decade that have gone bankrupt, and you could have predicted that at the beginning. This is one of the downsides. There's a lot of these models that have been rolled out in the US right now are based solely on having thousands and thousands of agents to actually make the business work. If they're below that number, that brokerage is in jeopardy of going bankrupt. When you've got really low caps, you've got things like that, you are really, you're dependent on a massive number of realtors to make that work. where theoretically the right business model should be, what do you need to do to add 20% to the bottom line of the realtors you've got, rather than try and find 20% more. I mean, however, but when you've got a cap on the business and there's a certain point where you make no more money on the agent, that model's never going to fly. Because why would you invest in helping somebody grow that after they've paid you $7,000, there's no more money in it? So really what that model drives is it drives the broker never to want to invest any time or energy or money into the agent, because there's a very short use period, period where you have use to me, and then over and above that, there's no use. There's no money being made, and my want to invest in your growth is gone.
Yeah. So that's where those models, as long as they exist, there's always going to be this high volume element of people that see this not as a profession, but more as a hobby, not even a hobby, but more of a quick buck that can be made. And that is the challenge in it all. I think that the thing that we looked at with the brokerages that we own, but then also the ones that we operate with, is that, I've got our conference coming up shortly, and I'm, trying to look at some of the thesis around recruitment, because certainly I believe that, not many people moved in the period of time when they're all making money, or certain companies that don't need to be named are giving cash out checks that have clearly proven that it's wrong. Like I have a very popular saying amongst our group is that, Compass spent $1.8 billion to figure out that the traditional real estate brokerage is the only way to make money, not the way that they were doing it. I could have told them that in the beginning and saved 1.8.
30 years ago, Ben. I mean, that traditional model's always been there. If you want to know what works, look at the models that have been around for 30 years and have survived tough markets, have been through downturns. And unfortunately, I call these brokerages Minutemen. They're very, very good in the minute. They're very, very great when the market's flying. Things are selling in 3 days. We can live off quick transactions. How many discount brokerages have you seen disappear the minute we get to 60 days plus on the market? Because you financially can't afford to do what you need to do to move properties. So, hey, all due respect to them, great. You get in, you make your money, and you move on. But it is not a sustainable long-term model, because market conditions will change and put a lot of financial pressure on the business, providing you've got thousands and thousands of agents. So, I'm working with a few of those right now that as soon as we saw that little tip over the edge with the market where things went from 10 to 15 days and now we're up over 60 financially, it's impossible to fix because you can't change caps. We've got a lot of them now that are adding new fees, and now it's not the cheap option anymore, so we're starting to move. It's like, we've got to start thinking about the person first. Is the model sustainable to get them through to the end? But in the same respect, people are always going to jump. They're always going to move. We lose faith in leadership. We look for another lead opportunity. We create another relationship, and that's just the nature of the business of real estate. People are always going to move, and very few will stay at the same place for, historically a really long period of time.
Yeah,
I think I'm probably one of the only people I know that stayed with the same company my entire career.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. Like the shock and awe that I get when tell people that it's almost been 20 years that I've been with Harcourts, is that they're like, oh my God, however, the thing that, so the thing that I see within the industry, mate, I'd love your thought on this, is that the institutional money that comes in from an investor perspective, and then the leaders of those businesses, it's almost rewarding people that have never been in the industry. Like there's a multitude of leaders, mate. You said this before, is that there's a great deal of training out there in the space from people that have never actually done it. They just see a quick buck to be made, or they can come up with a thesis and they might be able to sell that. The same with some of the leaders of 99% of these huge real estate conglomerates. They've never been in it from a grassroots perspective, and you might be able to say that, well, no, the people need to have masters in business to actually understand how to get these structures and whatever it may be. But real estate is such a different beast. We see it in the training space, we see it in the real estate space. Why do you think that there's these inexperienced people within the real estate community that get these big opportunities?
I think because a lot of people forgot this was a people business. There's a lot of people that are thinking that real estate is going to be a technology-driven business. You will never take the human experience out of selling real estate. Many have tried it. They've tried it in the mortgage world. They've tried it in the real estate world. So there's a lot of people that think, let's put a business person in and run it like a business without caring about the personal experience that they go through. I mean, how many times have we heard that real estate's all going to be driven online? Nobody will ever deal with a realtor ever again. That's been going for the last decade, and it's never, ever come to fruition. Because the whole process of transaction real estate is a very emotional experience that people go through. You take that out, and all of a sudden we become absolutely worthless, and that's why they don't last. And I think I see the value behind it if you're a publicly traded company wanting to have somebody in there with that sort of economic background, totally understand it, but it's been proven time and time again, it's not always the right way. When you drive profits over and above the performance of what the business is going to be doing now and long term, you become another minute man. You're very good in the minute, but the minute that market changes, you start to lose a lot of traction in what you're doing. I mean, we've seen that so many times.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the people that have been running these companies for years, the Gary Kellers of the world, the Mike Greens, those people, they've always been focused on the people.
Yep.
Doing the right thing by the people, and you will get through some tough times, because if you're not focusing on your people, the minute you start making a strategic market move based on finances, your people are out the door as quick as look at you. And we've seen that happen 3 or 4 times in the last 12 months.
Well, it's funny though, mate. Like, you've got to have a level of tenacity to stick with with that principle, though, and it's tough. It really is. It's tested. You get tested daily in this industry. Like, as a group, we are all about organic growth. Like, so if you look at 90% of our business owners now, I'm actually doing this thing for our company at conference where we look at the top 50 people, and out of the top 50, we've got 47 of them that started with us from nothing and have grown either to be in the top 50 or as a business owner now. So we get a lot of organic growth within that. However, that makes me really happy in the moment. But the amount of times that we have been shat on when we have put everything on the line or poured our complete heart out for people, and they've gone, okay, fuck you, I'm going over here for 5% more. After we have legitimately built them from scratch, you lose a little bit of faith. That tenacity needs to be there. Mate, what is your opinion of having to have that tenacity though? Like what do you think keeps these leaders going in that space?
I mean, funny enough, that's the downside of having such a huge population, is you can get shat on quite a few times and get over it pretty quickly. But it's almost like you trying to convince me that we should still be in love with every girlfriend we've ever had in our lives. I mean, at some point, it runs its time. You lose your interest and you move on. Relationships break down. I think what we should be probably thinking of is what was the value we had in that short term of the relationship. And I still swear by it whenever I'm talking to anybody about a business. When you hire incredible people, you've always got a time frame. Actually, funny enough, I do believe it was Mike Green that shared this quote with me early in my career, and it's very, very true. He said, your people are always leaving. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah,
and true. And I think the day that we think people will stay with us forever is the day they go. I mean, I've lost some incredible people in my business who you knew you got them to that level through the education, but I think we should also be proud of ourselves that we could teach people to be so good at what they do, they had options to go elsewhere. You see these quotes around there, what if we spend all this money on our people and they leave? And then the response was, what if we don't and they stay?
That's golden. That's really good. I'm stealing that. That's fantastic.
But it's the truth. I mean, you've got to know that they're going to go. I mean, you and I are like that as well. Opportunities present themselves. You consider what all those opportunities are. Like, life is about growth. Very few people will be complacent enough to stay in the same job for 30 or 40 years. I think human nature's changed a little bit now. It's more about that constant growth, and to see all these technology products that are coming in where we can make a lot of money doing those sort of things. Everything that's in front of us now is always about perpetual growth. How do we keep going? So, hey, people will leave for a lot less than 5%.
It's actually almost pompous and unfair to think that to expect somebody to stay. Actually, it's one of those things that Kevin quite well, our business partner in a lot of the offices, and that Kevin's gotten very comfortable over the last couple of years of realizing that we are a transitional stepping stone in our business. We choose to be a more expensive split, a more expensive business, but then we have to be comfortable then playing the role of building. And then once they get to a couple of $100,000 GCI, we don't make any sense to them anymore, right? We've taught them how to do it. They move on unless they are really attached to the auction concept and want that in their business, which then they move into business ownership. There has to be a segue at some point. And that's where we've had to find our niche in the marketplace of growing people into something that they want. Yeah. I just don't see it's a funny thing. It's almost like a soulless company, some of these bigger online cap models where what's the end goal here?
Well, interesting. You just sort of touched on something there, which has kind of triggered a thought in my head. I think, and you go and meet with, you go and find any business owner in the real estate world, whether they be a CEO, whether they be a branch manager, whatever they may be. When it comes to recruitment, their sole focus is to go and find the big producer that they can get instant revenue from. And there's very few models in this world anywhere that actually has a model set up to cater for someone that's producing a serious amount of income. That's probably 2-3% of our entire industry. 80% of our industry is made up with realtors doing probably 3 to 5 deals a year. That's the industry we should be catering for. And, with the model of Harcourts, with the training and the auctions and everything you have going, it's incredible for that pocket. But I think most people organically want the high producers, but they're always going to have a very limited time frame. They're going to go to the compasses with the big checks. And as soon as that check runs out, they'll move on to the next one. They've actually got something to sell. Ironically, you can really make that quite similar sort of transition to the mortgage world. There's a lot of sign-on bonuses and things like that in the mortgage world, and people will get through their guarantees, and then they'll go into another company and get another one because they're taking their volume with them. And unfortunately, we've got enough money in this industry where those people are very easily bought. Whereas I personally feel like the money in our industry is made by helping those 80% of people become 10 to 15 to 20 deal a year realtors, and they build that respect along the way. But we're also not creating multi-millionaires. We're creating people with security and transaction in their business where they can actually help their families and grow. We should be focusing on the right people. Yeah. If 80% of our industry is made up of them, that's the people that we should be focusing on. They're not going to cap in the first month. They're going to lean on you for the support. They're going to use your stuff. They're going to be thankful for things that you do for them. And I think you and I have both made the mistake in our lives where we've recruited some people that have been incredible high performers, thinking it was going to be the game changer in our business, and it was the worst bloody decision we ever made.
Oh, mate, we're speaking about something that I've sort of looked into pretty deeply, and that I want to sort of try and transition to our business partners. Is that the reality is that technically, if you look at it, we make less money out of the people that come in that are already established realtors. Because one, I believe that the CFO of Compass that left actually made a statement that 87% of people that then join the company would have a worse. Then their following quarter when they join the company would be worse than their previous 4 averages that they did in the other quarters. That's why that's his justification of why they did the signing bonuses, because what was happening if they weren't doing signing bonuses, the agent would then turn back around and blame the company for their lack of success within the preceding quarter. And I like it, that made a great deal of sense, but obviously it hasn't worked long-term in that notion. But it's just the getting them on the journey and keeping them on the journey the whole way through is a tough thing from an emotional standpoint, to then put so much time and effort in just to then see them move on. Yeah. That's the toughest thing, that to get people through their mind that you are just the stepping stone. You're not the end goal for these people, which is difficult to get through.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's like you've got to take advantage of that stepping stone the minute you get it. You bring in a higher producer, you get and do whatever you can with that person for a very short window of time. And I just think it's one of those flaws in our, but I think it's a business issue in general. Ben, it's like, I'll do it if you do it for me type of thing. And then eventually the relationship burns out. But, I think we're probably going to see a lot more changes in the next 12 months. I think there's some models out there that think they've really got it dialed in, which is the writing's on the wall just from a survivability standpoint. Yeah. Trying to find outside money to invest in a real estate company right now might not be the easiest thing, out there. But I think also real estate companies need to remember where their money comes from.
Yeah.
And I think going back to the question you asked me, what's wrong with it? Real estate as an industry has forgotten that our money comes from us selling houses. Our money doesn't come from selling realtors products that don't bloody work. It doesn't come from selling CRMs that are just so confusing that nobody knows how to use them. It doesn't come from penny pinching on every little transaction they do. Our money comes from selling houses. And the more houses we sell, the more money we should make.
But mate, this is the other part. Like, again, I want to talk about. I want to get into talking to you about mortgage and the space that is at the moment, and the way you've coached some people through, because it's been tough. But I want to make a quick point on this, and I want your opinion on it, because the thing that pisses me off about our industry as well, and it does really frustrate me, is that you see these brokers out there that have got these big teams, and they're very carefree. All they're doing is buying leads from Zillow on a buyer side, and they're trying to remove themselves so far away from the transaction. It's not funny. They're trying to remove every point of that, every part of it. They don't even want to have to do anything. They think buying a lead and putting a team in place so that then they can, do all of work and then get a check on the end of it. Like, it's that separation from the deal that I think is this training that is going on in the industry at the moment, that doesn't rely on the transaction of the people and the experience with the people, that could really see the soul sucked out of the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. God, what a great, I'm going to share a conversation that I had, which is exactly about this yesterday. And I was doing a bit of a consult with a potential new client. I will happily say it's not going to go much further than the original consultation, because there was an expenditure of about $35,000 a month in lead gen. So I said, just run me through the structure of the lead gen. And clearly in the first consultation, there's always a little bit of ego involved, like I'm the greatest realtor you've ever met type of thing. So I said, look, just run me through this. So you spend $35,000 a month on lead gen. Yep. What's your biggest expense? Hands down lead gen. It was 10 times more expensive than anything else. So I said, run me through the process. Great. Well, we've got 2 ISAs that we employ, and all they do is sit there and dial the leads. That's what they do. All day long, they're sitting there dialing the leads. And I said, right, let's put this into perspective. Your biggest expenditure, your most dangerous thing in your business is your $35,000 a month you're spending on lead gen, correct? He goes, yep, 100%. And I said, then why the hell would you put your cheapest employee with the worst experience ever to be the first port of contact on the most expensive thing in your business?
It's a phenomenal question.
So that is the dumbest thing ever. I said, if it costs me money and it's predicted on me actually making money in my business, the very first person they're going to talk to is the person who gives them the most confidence about where they're going. And also understanding how the market works right now, 90% of those leads you're getting aren't ready to buy today. And all your ISA is doing is looking for someone that wants to sell in this moment. And where the real issue comes is everybody's driving their business at the moment on instant gratification. If I don't get what I want for you at this moment, I'm going to move on to somebody else. Those people are walking away from $150,000, $200,000 a month in commission because they're not getting what they want today.
It's an amazing point.
Mm-hmm.
Instant gratification is a real problem in every sector of this
But
business.
I'm Amazon Prime King. I know exactly what it's like. I'll buy the shittiest product 10 times so I can get it the same day. I won't spend the money on the good one, but that's life in general.
Yeah.
I always joke about this as well, and I know we don't have a lot of restrictions on what we can say, but I look at real estate agents like this and just hypothetically imagine being a 22-year-old guy. Their whole dating life right now is on a phone, swipe right, swipe left. Or if I can't find the person I can hook up with today, I'm moving on to the next one. They take that relationship mindset into business. If you're not going to sell your home today, I'm going to go find someone that will. But tomorrow they might want to do it, but you've already burnt the relationship. If we don't get what we want from the interaction the minute we have it, we move on to somebody else. We've lost patience. We've lost the ability to follow something through to the end.
It's kind of depressing when you think about it that way, that's the way that the generation that's coming through to real estate is going to see things, that they won't look at the sphere of influence and nurturing element of the business where the real gold is. Yeah, I guess that, like what we've always said, Aaron, you and I have had this conversation from day one. You actually don't need to be good at your job, like scripts, dialogues, or anything like that, if you just nurture the relationships that ultimately then you find, because they'll call you and say, hey, come on in and buy that property, or come on in and list that property with me. And then ultimately, that comes down to the fact that, well, hey, I don't actually even need to present. Whereas these people that are getting these leads, you need to actually be great at conversion, and because you're selling strangers on you. No wonder people get burnt out.
Yeah, but the other thing to remember too is all these people pushing scripts and dialogues about the greatest conversion. We're talking to freaking people. Every one of them is going to have a different pain point, a different want, a different need. And all we're trying to do is sell something down their throat of what we think they want. We're not curious enough to ask the right questions to see what the conversion will be, because we've got this one focus about how do I get you to give me money right now. It's just life in general. It's what people are doing. But, it's just an interesting thing. But everything around us is like that now. Everything we do is based on speed, how quickly we can get it. It's just how everything works in life in general. But real estate being a people business, it'll never be about that. It's one of the most emotional things that people go through.
Yeah.
And we're trying to take it out.
Speaking of them,
throw on top of that, Ben, and it's something that sort of lines up with this. And I think where everybody's going is this automation. And when we talk about lead gen, everybody wants to automate the relationships. They want to automate that. And now I do think automation is critical. But I think the things that are designed for our industry right now are actually designed to screw your business up. Because we're trying to automate the complete wrong part of our business. Everything the client doesn't see should be automatic. It should happen with a process. It shouldn't do. But the most human part of our business needs to be the front part, the engagement with the client. And every product out there right now is teaching you how to slide dial, it's teaching you how to send text campaigns. It's eliminating the emotion from the conversation, which gives us everything we need to do deals.
Yeah.
The emotional response.
Yeah. And that's the one thing that when it comes down to it, when the robots get close to replacing us, is that's the one thing that everybody's going to want back into this, is the emotion, because the emotion is the thing that there's no algorithm or process that is going to replace us if we really hone that. Now, mate, I want to segue here, because I want to talk about, speaking of emotion, is that you do a lot of business in the mortgage industry over the last couple of, over the last 6 months.
It's an emotional space right now, Ben. Very emotional.
Mate, I want to talk to you about like I've got realtors that we deal with that, haven't done deals for 6 months because the market literally dried up from a transaction perspective. But, they can cry all they want, but realistically, the mortgage market dried up just as much, if not more.
Quite a bit more.
Yeah. So mate, talk to me about the industry, but talk to me too about what are you telling the LOs and the people that you're operating in that space at the moment? I'm just interested from a mental set, how you're helping them reset or how you're helping them hang in.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a very good question because, funny enough, predominantly what I'm doing in the mortgage world is teaching lenders how to deal with realtors. So it's like kind of like a joke about it. They kind of sound like the realtor whisperer because it's a different language. We all do it, but ironically, the mortgage business is sold by product. We've got a lot of very successful people we work with that have great relationships and so forth. But generally, the mortgage business is a product. Who's got the cheapest rates, so forth. That's the door opener. And so the big thing we're focusing on with them, and they have been hit a lot harder. We've got some of the biggest name brands in the country, doing $40 million in 2021 and now doing $3 or $4 billion, I should say. So we're talking about some serious cutbacks. There's been more layoffs in the mortgage business than any other industry, as far as I'm aware. They're expecting at least about a 50% reduction in the amount of lenders in the industry by middle of this year, which is huge.
That's massive.
But the big thing with lenders is we've got to start they've definitely, and for me, the mindset we're teaching them is the 3-dimensional business model, because they're very one-dimensional. They look at every realtor like their opportunity. They look at every client like their opportunity, where mortgage is and for me, it's the most emotional part of it, because, if I use you to buy a home, you've done all the good stuff. You've found the home that I like. If I'm the lender, I'm the arsehole that determines whether you can afford it.
Yeah.
The most emotional part of it. And so for me, it's really creating an experience that makes the mortgage part of it a little bit more enjoyable, because that waiting moment to find out whether you can actually qualify for the mortgage to buy the home, that has literally been one of the worst experiences in the industry here, because you sit back, you wait, you don't know whether you got it, and then you get a lucky surprise at the end of it. So it's teaching them how to elevate the experience that the realtor goes through and the realtor's client goes through, and how that process can actually help them grow their business. Now, we've had quite a few LOs that we work with that were doing sort of $1 or $2 million a month that are now doing $15 million a month, because the referral business in mortgage works just as well, if not better, than it does in real estate, because I do have a product, and it is also a very funky thing to go through. And we see so many deals fall over. At one point there, we had a 50-something% fall out of escrow rate, because we are literally selling homes to people based on a shitty piece of paper that they've downloaded online saying, hey, based on the lie you just told me, you can afford this home. Yeah. They go and put somebody's home under contract based on that. So it's teaching them how to run that model a little bit better, but also.
So you're referring to the pre-approval document or whatever that they've just lied on and have it all. Yeah. Here's a pre-approval for $2 million. Really, you can only apply for $1 million.
A job when you make $40,000 a year. I'm good with that. That sounds like a good deal. Yeah.
Mate, I've never thought about the relationship that way, actually, with the mortgage side of it. I've honestly never thought about it as deeply as what I have right now, in the sense that I didn't even go into thinking that, the real estate agent really does take all the glory out of the transaction from the mortgage perspective, because the mortgage person, like you said, will make the decision on whether or not they can have their dream home, but also they're the ones to probably point out some of the stupid emotional decisions, buying that car or not paying that credit card off or whatever it may be, is the thing that actually stopped you from doing it. And there's such a thing as shooting the messenger.
Well, funny enough, how many deals have I know personally, I've experienced this where I've had a deal that might have gone sideways because of the lender that I'd referred them to. That was all my fault. I never it's okay, it wasn't your fault. They come back and go, what the hell were you doing? It plays such a major part of the role. And we've had a couple of mortgage companies that I've worked with now. You've actually met one of my good clients, Ty, and taken them from zero to $3 or $4 billion companies by focusing on that strategy. The more realtors that support us, the more people that bring volume through, the whole things are connected. But funny story, when I was selling real estate, my lender was a critical part of my business, and I gave him a business card and his title was payroll. Because if he didn't do his job right, nobody got paid. Like, that's the way we've got to look at that position. You wouldn't be doing half the deals you do with right now with all the lenders if you looked at them as the person responsible for you getting paid. You'd be going, hell no, would I ever let that person touch my business? The seriousness of that role, and that's probably one of the things that defines my top performing realtors, is the relationships they have with those key partners in their business. It's not the person who's giving you $500 for leads. It's the person who's helping you call your database. it's the person who's being a resource and helping you cross-qualify every loan. Like, it's such a critical part of the business. And so for me, that marriage was a natural thing for me to go to, because if I could fix that, it helps instant growth in their business. You've got to find the right LOs, but it's a bloody good process when you get it right.
The one thing, mate, on the final closing note of this session, because I think there's been a great deal of value that's come out of this from a perspective of people being able to look at some of the information that you've given them today, and they can possibly go back and work on the characteristics of their own business and how they're doing it. But the next 12 months is going to be a decorative and colourful experience. There's no question about that, and it may even be longer. Who knows? And whether that be prices coming down or just lack of transactions, I think that we're not in a recession from a perspective of pricing, but we are in a recession from a perspective of volume. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. But mate, what would you say is the one thing for realtors and anybody listening in whatever industry that they're in at the moment that they should be doing over the next 12 months to ensure that they get through this in a way that they come out stronger at the end?
Good question. It's probably a change on a couple of things. And I think the first thing that I probably would bring up in that is that, everybody talks about consistency, be consistent in your business. I think we kind of got to burn that. We got a lot of people being super consistent on really average shit that doesn't work. I mean, there's no glory in that. And I think the replacement for consistency is you got to be bloody persistent on the things that that work. And along with that being persistent is you can't stop doing the things that you do that that are going to work, because one arsehole has a problem with it. We get on social media, one person has a problem with what we do, so we stop. We're basing a lot of decisions on one or two bits of negative feedback. In my life, it's 51%. If 51% of people hate it, I stop doing it. 50-50, I'm leaning on my side of doing it. So this is a big part of it, is that we're in one of those markets now where the results aren't coming as quick. You have to really believe in what you're doing, be super persistent. The second thing for me is we've got to start getting a lot more curious about what we're doing. We've got to stop trying to push people and start asking the right questions. You and I both know, buddy, if you ask enough questions, you'll eventually get the answer that you want, rather than trying to force your opinions. And the more curious we get, the more answers we're going to, and the more solutions we're going to get to the problems we have in front of us. So doing that. And then the third one that I would be focusing on is patience. We haven't had to have had patience for years. Everything was a transaction that happened in 2 or 3 hours for the last couple of years. And unfortunately, with what happened in 2020 and 2021, it lasted for so long that it actually created a lot of bad habits. And we lost our patience. If we weren't getting the result real quick, we'd move on. So we've got to bring that back and be persistent, get real curious and ask the right questions, because most of the people we're talking to don't know what they need right now. There's still confusion in the market. And then the third, if you're just really, really patient with what happens, the result will always come. And I use a term all the time in my coaching, is that if you remove time frame from everything, don't base anything you do based on when you're going to get paid, but base it on the process of what you're doing and let the process roll out. You'll always get the rewards. Because the day you quit because you're not being persistent, or you've just really given up on the process, you're just generating business for somebody else. Those three things, you can control every one of them, and it is a game changer in everything that you do.
Well, folks, there's some gems there, and hopefully you've gotten as much out of today as certainly I have. I do love philosophizing the industry with you, mate, and certainly it's been, not only is it been great to recap the decorative journey that you've had, I think that everybody can understand that you've had probably a perspective that very few people have had across as many places and industries as what you've been able to be exposed to. So there's certainly some value in everything that you're saying. So, mate, thanks for joining us on Rethink Real Estate.
My pleasure being here. Really appreciate shooting the shit with you, Ben, and talking about the market. It's a place that you and I are very passionate about, and hey, I think we've all got opinions, and we've all got our own views and our own thoughts on what it is, and maybe it's time that we as an industry started thinking for ourselves and stopped listening to the wrong people. Maybe take the good out of it, deal with that, forget about the bad stuff, because I know for a fact, Ben, the reason I still have a job is when people come to an event, they go, 90% of what he said I love, but those 2 or 3 things that he said, don't like it, so I'll never do it, but they come back 2 months later and keep coming to the events.
Exactly right, mate.
People just need to start doing some stuff, chase some failure, make some mistakes, learn what you got to fix. Just don't let fear get in the way of trying stuff.
Chase some failure. That's nice. That's good. So, folks, if you are looking to get in touch with Aaron, I've got all of his details in the show notes, along with the website as well, that you definitely need to check out, which is SellWell, which can give you some really good perspective on everything in the industry. But, mate, again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you as always, buddy.
So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.